and welcome to Fully Booked Filipino Reads Fest. This month of August, we are putting the spotlight on literature and arts by Filipino authors. Tonight, we will meet New York Times bestselling author Erin Entrada Kelly. This conversation is brought to you in partnership with Arete, the creativity and innovation hub of Ateneo de Manila University. Currently, Arete is releasing programs through Arete Connect, an online platform that can be accessed by anyone. Learn more about their flagship projects such as magisterial lectures, Sandaang Salaysay, Quick Think Our Way Forward, Arete in Motion, and Arete Makerspace through their online channels. Visit arete.ateneo.edu, their YouTube channel, and their Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter accounts at Arete Ateneo to access these programs for free. Arete provides space and freedom for groups of different disciplines to create, collaborate, and share knowledge, skills, and practices. Our guest author will be interviewed by Sian Abad Hugo. Sian teaches English and great books at the Ateneo de Manila University. Her books include Father and Daughter with Himino Abad, Sweet Summer and Other Stories, Leaf and Shadow, Stories About Some Friendly Creatures, and Saling Kit, a 1986 diary. She edited an anthology for young adults called Friend Zones. She also wrote 4 chapter books for children, Yaya Maya and the White King, The Earth Healers, Letters from Crispin, and The Looking Glass Tree. She lives with her husband, hobbits, and wonder cats in QC. Cian will be interviewing writer Erin Entrada Kelly. Erin received the 2018 Newbery Medal for Hello Universe, the 2021 Newbery Honor for We Dream of Space, the 2017 Apollo Award for The Land of Forgotten Girls, and the 2016 Golden Kite Honor Award for Blackbird Fly, among other honors. She is also the author and illustrator of the Maybe Maybe Marisol Rainey series. She is a New York Times bestseller whose work has been translated into several languages. Her 5th book, Lalani of the Distant Sea, was a finalist for the 2020 Mythopoeic Award for Children's Fantasy and was named one of the best books of the year by the New York Public Library, the Horn Book, Booklist, Bookpage, and others. Before becoming a children's author, Erin worked as a journalist and magazine editor. She received numerous awards for community service journalism, feature writing, and editing from the Louisiana Press Association and the Associated Press. In 2018, Hello Universe and You Go First were both acquired for adaptation. Hello Universe is being adapted by Netflix, and You Go First is being adapted for the stage. Erin has a bachelor's degree in women's studies and liberal arts from McNeese State University and an MFA from Rosemont College. She lives in Delaware. She teaches in the MFA programs at Hamline University and Rosemont College. She also teaches fiction with Gotham Writers Workshop. Let's welcome our lovely guests, Erin and Cian.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
A pleasant day to you, Erin. It's great to meet you. On these days, how are you doing? How are you holding up during these strange times?
You know, I feel like I'm doing well. Like everyone, there's kind of an undercurrent of stress and frustration and uncertainty. But you know, I'm very fortunate. You know, I'm healthy. My family's healthy. I don't have little young kids to worry about. My daughter's grown and out of the house, so
Wow.
I'm very fortunate. You know, I think we're all suffering from kind of undercurrents, like I said, of stress. But big picture, I'm doing very well.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear, you know. Since Hello Universe, you've published a lot more books. I think you've got like 7 now. And your most recent book is entitled Maybe Maybe Marisol Rainey. So was this written during the pandemic?
It was and it wasn't. So it's been in the works for several years. It took me a long time to write it because I was trying to figure out who Marisol was and what kind of girl she was. So even though I finished it during the pandemic and I did a lot of the illustrations during the pandemic, it had been in the works for a while.
Oh, what was the germ or the seed that sort of started you out writing this book?
So it kind of started with my editor because years ago she said, you know, maybe you should try writing for younger middle grade readers. So like ages 7 to 10 or 7 to 9. And I thought, okay, I'll give that a try. And I started trying to like come up with these ideas for an 7 or 8 year old girl, and none of them were really working. And I told her after a year or so, I said, I don't know if this is working because none of the characters I'm coming up with feel right to me. And she told me, why don't you just try to think about yourself at that age? And maybe that's the book that you can write, basically a book about you. And I remember telling her no one would want to read that book because because I didn't do anything. I had a big imagination. I loved to read, but I was very scared of a lot of stuff. And I told her in the conversation, I said I was too scared to even climb a tree because I was afraid I would fall. And she said, basically, she kind of looked at me like, well, there you go. And that was the seed that planted Marisol Rainey, because that's the plot of the book, right? Is about a girl who's afraid to climb a tree. So basically, Marisol became me, and she is me. She's very much me when I was that age.
Yeah. Oh, well, speaking of climbing trees and trees, I just noticed I was reading The Land of Forgotten Girls, and they lived in a place called Magnolia Towers. And it was a sad place because it had no magnolia trees. And now you have a magnolia tree in the middle of the backyard, right? Are magnolia trees somehow significant to you? Do they have some kind of meaning?
I love that question. So they don't really have any deep meaning, except that I love magnolia trees, and I grew up in Louisiana, and there were magnolia trees on my street. And I just think they're beautiful. They have these rich, dark green, thick leaves and these beautiful magnolias that only bloom for a short period of time. So one of the things that I thought about when I was writing Land of Forgotten Girls is that, the girls, like you said, they live in a sad environment. It's not a bright or cheerful world that they live in, but they have the concept of trees or flowers that bloom for a short time. And I think in that book, Sol gives her stepmother a flower that only blooms for a short time. And it to me, I was kind of thinking about like the bright spots, the bright spots in an otherwise gloomy environment. And sometimes flowers can represent that. So they're only there for a short time, but they're there, right? So that's kind of where the magnolia trees came into play.
Wow. Okay. Well, the tree is also like a central character. She has her own name, right? Pepina. And she's like a symbol to Marisol, right? Because Marisol can't climb Pepina. What made you think of a character like Marisol? So you said that you based her a little or a lot?
A lot, yeah.
A lot.
And yes, so the plot came from, whenever I was talking to my editor and I said, I was too afraid to even climb a tree. I thought that meant that, I guess in my head, to write a character who's 7 or 8 years old, the age Marisol is, I kept imagining this big dynamic character who gets into trouble, because a lot of books for that age group are about kind of precocious kids who get into a lot of misadventure and this kind of thing. And that's not the kind of girl that I was. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to write a book about a girl who's afraid to climb the tree in her backyard. Because when I was a kid, I thought, and I think many of us think this when we're children or even when we're adults, you feel like you're the only one who feels the way that you do, And when I was a little girl, I felt like everyone was braver than me, and I felt like I was the only one who was afraid, and I would see kids doing things and I would think, why can't I do those things? And I would worry all the time, just like Marisol. There's like parts in the book at night where she's laying there and her mind's just racing with worried thoughts. And as I got older, and especially as I started writing for young people and interacting with young readers, I realized that this is not a unique thing, right? This is something we all share. We all know what it's like to be afraid. We all know what it's like to feel like the only person who's going through what we're going through. Yeah. And so many young people tell me, oh, I stay up all night worrying too, So when I wrote the book, those are the kinds of things I kept in my mind. Just like, what was I worried about when I was her age? What kind of thoughts did I have? Why was I afraid? And hopefully, like young readers who read this, who are anxious or stressed or have a lot of fears or are kind of quiet, will feel seen when they read this, and they'll be able to see, oh, there's other people know what that's like too.
I feel seen.
Oh, good. That makes me so happy.
I'm just as young as Marisol Rainey. No, she's very relatable. I was also a very shy kid growing up, and which makes Jada, is that how you pronounce her name?
Yes.
The best friend's name? Okay, which makes Jada, her friendship with Jada, very, very interesting, and touching, because no matter how different they are, their friendship is they're so close to each other, and she feels like she can open up to Jada. But who is the inspiration? Who was your Jada?
Yes, this is Jada, Marisol and Jada. So just as Marisol is based off of me when I was a little girl, Jada is inspired by my best friend at the time, whose name was Rosalind. And, I mentioned this in interviews sometimes, how sometimes you forget your password, and the security question is like, what was the name of your childhood best friend? Sometimes that's one of the prompts. Yeah. And there's a reason for that. It's because that's something that's special that we'll never forget. There's something about that elementary school age and friendships that develop around that time that are special in a way that no other friendship is. Even if you lose touch or part ways, you still look back on that friendship as something really unique and special. So Jada is very much inspired by my childhood BFF, who is also very, very smart, because Jada is very, very smart, and also seemed to be, sometimes I would think, I wish I could be more like Rosalind, and she's smart and she does things, and, we all know what that's like, right? So that's where Jada comes from. And it was really, it was a lot of fun to write that friendship, because in a lot of my other books, I write for older middle grade readers as well. So like a friendship when you're 12 is very different, and it can be fraught with a lot of drama often, and growing pains, as you and your friend are like figuring out the world and each other and themselves. So it was nice to write a friendship that was just very pure and sweet and special, at that age, which is what happens at that age, I feel like.
Yeah. How lucky to have a Jada, right?
Yes, we all need a Jada.
We all need a Jada. So it says on the cover that, like Marisol, you like to name things. From a writer's perspective now, how do you name your chapters?
That's a great question. And I don't know if there's any necessarily magic to it. I just kind of think, what is this chapter about? And sometimes I try to pull out, a phrase or something from that chapter that is really meaningful to me. So it's kind of a mix of, what is the tone of this chapter? What is this chapter about? What is this chapter doing? Because I always tell my students that each chapter each scene needs to be doing something. So that's something that I ask myself, and then I that's how I come up with the chapter titles.
What about book titles?
Book titles are much more difficult. So that process involves usually me coming up with several book titles and my editor not liking them. And then she says, let's keep thinking, or let's think of some other titles. So this title, I was actually happy because I came up with this title. This was a very early title that I came up with. And The Land of Forgotten Girls. Those are the only two books where the original title that I envisioned for the book stayed the same. All my other books have changed titles, and that usually happens kind of close to the end. And sometimes the book is very different at the end through revisions and things. So the tenor of the title might need to change. So, it depends. Like for Hello Universe, the original title of Hello Universe was Virgil in Valencia. But as I wrote the book and as it went through revisions, all these other characters also became important. And there were all these other point of view characters. So my editor felt like Virgil in Valencia, the novel was about much more than just Virgil in Valencia. So we broadened it. And she wanted to bring in the elements of, Kaori, that was fortune telling, and fate and destiny. So that's how we conjured up this new title. But it was a lot of brainstorming to get to it.
Oh, that's a beautiful title.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy with it.
And it captures that the little universe that Virgil has, and the other characters revolving around him, and how he finally gets to say hello.
Yes.
So it also says on the cover, we were reading the about the author part of the cover. It says this is the first book you illustrated.
Yes.
What did you learn about book illustration while you were doing?
Oh boy. What did I learn? It was very, one thing that I struggled with is I'm not necessarily a visual thinker. Even when I write my books, my characters, some authors really describe everything about their characters and how they look. And I'm very much internal. So I'm usually thinking about feelings and emotion. And I don't spend a lot of time visualizing things, if that makes sense. So that can be a problem when you're illustrating, because I couldn't figure out what the illustrations needed to be. So that's where the art director came in and my editor came in. I learned a lot about, in fact, let me show you. I learned a lot about designing a character. So I want to show some early sketches of Marisol that I'd started out with. This is an early sketch. Yes. And I'll tell you, as a writer and as an illustrator, you have to be able to hear feedback and also learn what to do with that feedback. So one piece of feedback that I got, let me show you. Oh, here's another one. Oh, Marisol. And in early drafts, she was going to wear these big overalls. So that's why she's with these pockets. And here's another one, Marisol. So one piece of feedback that I got was that she looked too young. So if you'll look at these, the art director and my editor said, these are cute, but she looks too young because she's very round, and she looks more like 2, 3, or 4 years old here. And I thought, okay, I didn't think about that. So my editor and the art director said, basically, why don't you go back and look at pictures of yourself, since she's me, when you were that age. And so I did. I went back and I realized something. I realized that when I was 7 and 8, I was not round at all. I was very lean, and I was all elbows and knees, with long legs. And so then I started to redraw her. And now you can see she looks much more like an 8-year-old than in the earlier sketches. So that's kind of how she came to be. So I learned a lot about, for example, like small things such as, you see her neck here, is she has a long neck, and in these early drafts she didn't even have a neck. I wasn't even drawing a neck, and that was one of the things that they told me was, she needs like a long lean neck to create that vision of being long and lean like a lot of 8-year-olds are. And so it was a lot of little things like that, and also just trying to figure out what I wanted the illustrations to do that the text wasn't doing. So another thing that we talked about was how to use the illustrations to incorporate some humor into the book, because she spends a lot of time being scared and anxious and worrying, and those aren't necessarily funny. I mean, they can be funny, but we talked about using those illustrations to bring in the humor element, and I feel like a lot of the illustrations served the story well in that way.
Yeah.
So it was a huge learning curve, but it was incredible. I mean, as with anything, because I was afraid, because I don't feel like I'm naturally an illustrator. I'm more of a writer, right? As with anything, when you have a huge challenge, and at the end, it's a struggle, and you're learning and you're figuring it out, but then at the end, it's that much more rewarding. Yes. Because you have the end product and you say, okay, I did it. I didn't think I could, but I did. So it was such a journey. So I'm so grateful for it.
I really love her hair that goes like that. Like that.
Yeah, her little pigtails. Yes.
Cute.
Yes. That's one thing that I was trying to figure out her hair, and I thought, okay, I'm going to give her little pigtails, because pigtails, I mean, they're cute.
It's like her distinguishing mark.
Yes, thank you. That's what I was going for. And I also it was also very important to me to have a character with very dark hair, because Marisol's half Filipino, of course. And when I was growing up, there weren't a lot of characters that had like black or dark hair, because a lot of them had like blonde hair or brown hair. And I really want readers who have that dark hair, especially if they're of Asian descent, to be able to say, oh, that's what, my hair looks like. So that was also important to me. Little things like that.
It's hard to believe that this was your first book you ever illustrated, because they really look professionally done. And you were able to capture, I think, her anxiety, right? She always looks so scared and anxious, and so the passage and about the author on the cover also made me think of comfort zones.
Yes,
because that's what Marisol did. She went out of her comfort zone. Do you believe in getting out of your comfort zone?
Absolutely. Now I believe in so there's okay, for example, I'm afraid of heights, so I wouldn't necessarily get out of my comfort zone by going mountain climbing or hang gliding. That I won't do, but I will get outside of my comfort zone creatively and professionally, and that's kind of part of where the illustrating came in, because I've been drawing my whole life, but more just doodles. You know how you just kind of draw little doodles and stuff. So I never thought of it as like an actual thing to do in my career. And when my editor's actually the one who suggested, maybe you should try illustrating the book. And I said yes, even though I was terrified, because I knew it was outside of my comfort zone. And I've actually this fall, I've enrolled in a poetry workshop, even though that's outside of my comfort zone. And I'm working on my first work of nonfiction, even though I read a lot of nonfiction, but I've never done it before. And honestly, first of all, it keeps life interesting when you're doing something new and different. But also it makes you evolve as a person, as a human being, to be able to experience different things that are outside of your bubble, because we all live in a bubble. Our bubbles are all very different from each other, but we all have them. And the more you step out of that, the more you learn about yourself. And, so I'm very much a person who likes to step out of my comfort zone. And I think it just makes me not just a better writer, but a better person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so now we have questions about your writing. We'd like to ask you about your writing.
Yes.
In many of your books, you have a character who likes to make believe or tell stories, right? Who was the storyteller in your life, and how important is storytelling to you?
That's a great question. And I would say storytelling is my life. So it's very important, obviously. And I escaped into books, which is kind of what led me to want to be a writer in the first place. When I was Marisol's age, that's when I started writing. But when I look back and think about stories that I heard, it had to have been my mother. So a lot of people ask me if I grew up hearing Filipino folktales and stories. And she would tell me stories of growing up and home and all these things. But a lot of the stories she told were about the saints, because my mother is a very, very devout Catholic. And whatever your religious or spiritual beliefs are, these stories are filled with, plot twists and magic and struggle, lots of struggle, right? Because she would also tell me a lot of Bible stories. She loved to tell me the story of Job. That was her favorite. So all these things are infused with great stories and about triumph. And another thing about the stories, one of the common threads that I think about, I think consciously and subconsciously when I'm writing, is the message of the stories that she would tell me about the saints, whether I wanted to hear them or not at the time. I look back on them now and I appreciate them, because the greater message is that doing something for others, being selfless, thinking bigger than yourself, whatever that means for you. And all about sometimes sacrificing for the greater good, whatever that means to you, right? That was the common thread of all these stories, and all about triumphing over suffering, right? And those are things that I think about a lot. And stories help us do that. They help us. That was one of the biggest pieces for Land of Forgotten Girls that inspired me, is the power of stories to be able to create light when there is no light there, or you can't see the light. That's what stories do for people. And that's what I hope that my books do for readers. I always say, if a reader's reading my book and they feel seen, like you said earlier, or they feel like they're not alone, then I have succeeded, right? That's my goal always.
And also that I think stories are everywhere. Like the way that your character in, what is her name? Sorry, I'm bad with names. Saul, right?
Yes.
And Ming, when they're walking down the street and just pointing to things and making up stories about the things around them in their everyday life, that was so cool, I think.
Yes, I mean that's how, yeah. And that also keeps life rich and interesting, because if you're waiting for inspiration to hit, then you may be waiting a long time. But if you're aware of the inspiration around you all the time, then you'll see it,
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
And your characters also tend to talk to imaginary people. I noticed, right? There's like Saul to her dead sister, Amelia. In the Land of Forgotten Girls, there's Virgil to a fictional hero, I think Ruby.
Yes.
In Hello Universe, and Bird to the mission specialist, Judith.
Yes.
And We Dream of Space. Right. So is that important? Is that something to know? What is the reason behind?
I love that you asked this question because I love that you asked that question because it's, well, it is very important to me, and there is a reason. And the reason is because when I was young and I was worrying, as I mentioned, like a little Marisol, and I was scared. I felt when I was a young girl, I felt very lonely a lot. I felt very alone. I felt like I was the only person in the world, and especially at night. And even to this day, as an adult, I don't like the nighttime. I'm very much a morning person because everything is so quiet. And I even have this in the Hello Universe. Valencia says she hates the nighttime because everything is so quiet and she feels like the only person in the universe. And I felt that way a lot when I was young. And as a way to comfort myself, because the incredible thing about young people is that they have the ability to, they have resilience. And sometimes adults forget how resilient young people are. And if they need to be comforted and there's no one there to comfort them, they will find ways to comfort themselves. And if they don't have, I had very present parents, but if they're a young person who doesn't have guidance, they find ways to guide themselves, right? And when I was young and I needed to comfort myself, I would talk to imaginary people. So it could be a guardian angel, because of course my mother was always talking about angels around us and guardian angels, going back to her devout Catholicism, and they're there. So I might talk to a guardian angel. I might talk to an imaginary friend. So that was a huge part of my life growing up, is talking. And I would actually talk aloud. I would whisper, and have these conversations, much like the characters in the books. So that's where it comes from, because that was such a big part of my childhood.
Were you also a reader? Were there children's books you grew up on?
Yes, I was a voracious reader. I always have been. And my favorite books were, I loved Judy Bloom's books. And I loved, there was a book called The Very Worried Walrus. Do I have it nearby? That I absolutely loved for obvious reasons. So yes, I was a very voracious. I will say that I wish that when I was a young girl, there were more books that weren't white characters in suburban America. But now, the good thing is that young people today have books that have characters from all different backgrounds. But back then, in the 80s, the diversity wasn't necessarily there. So I read a lot of Judy Bloom, who I loved, and she's still like one of my role models.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So how have her books helped you in your own writing? Or maybe if you have other children's books, favorite children's books also, how have they helped you in your writing?
I think for me, one of the things that I remember when I was 10, 11, 12, reading Judy Bloom's books is that I felt seen. Going back to that whole thing about feeling seen, I felt like this person was writing about me, just me specifically. And like all these secret thoughts that I had in my head, somehow this writer knows them, and at the time, it was revelatory because you're just reading it and you're connecting to these characters. And, as you get older, you realize it's because we all have a shared humanity between us. We all, like I said before, we all know what it's like to be scared. We all know what it's like to be not feel good enough and all these different things. So for me, I think about that when I'm writing my books, because I want to do what Judy Bloom did. And I think the ways that she did that as an author were, she was very, very focused on her characters. And my books are very driven by characters. And in fact, they're all the plot. Everything about the books that I write always start with the character. So a lot of writers will start with a plot. Oh, I have an idea. I want to write about this. I always start with one character, and then that character is kind of like the seed that gets planted, and then the plot just kind of grows from that character. So I'm always thinking about my characters and what it's like to be them and walk around as them. And those are the books that I most respond to, the books where I read them and I feel like this is a real, it doesn't feel like a character, it feels like a real person who could just walk out of the book if they wanted to. And that's what I always strive to do.
So when you start writing out the book, do you know how it's going to end?
I do. I start, because before I even start writing, I plan. I spend a lot of time thinking about my characters first. Then the plot comes from that. And then I know how it's going to end, because I feel like if I don't know where it ends, I don't know how to get there. And all writers are different, of course, but I feel like I need a destination so I can create a roadmap to get to the destination.
Do you have like a message in mind already, a theme?
Sometimes I do, not at the beginning, because at the beginning I'm just thinking about the character. But then as I'm fleshing everything out, I start to think about, okay, what is this book really about? And honestly, I think my books are all kind of about the same thing, which is it's important for me that, you know, all of my books have characters who need and want to feel seen, but who don't, and who don't always have a lot of self-belief. And it's important for me that the character finds that through the journey of the novel, but also remains true to who they are. Because I never want the message to be that if you're a shy kid, then the answer to your problems is to stop being shy and start being outgoing. Like, I never want that to be the message. I want the message to be, you're shy and that's okay. And you can be who you are. You don't have to change. But this is how you do that, you know? So that's kind of the message. I feel like it's a common message throughout each of my books, is like, you don't have to change the core of who you are. All you have to do is be the best version of yourself and love that version of yourself. And that doesn't mean to change who you are. It means to learn to love who you are.
So more like self-acceptance.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, I see that. I see that in Marisol when she stops comparing herself to to all the others around her. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. How aware are you of audience? Do you think about like, I'm writing to 7-year-olds, or do you have?
I do.
You do.
Yeah, I think about. I think you have to, because, you know, if you're writing for an age, it's a very delicate age, and you want to make sure that the things that you're sharing are responsible and that you're taking care of them, you know, in a responsible way. So I think of it in that way. And I'm often thinking of myself in the sense that, what did I need when I was young? What did I need to hear? What did I need to see or read or understand? And it's kind of about taking that adult knowledge and perspective and sharing it without being didactic or lecturing, or, because nobody wants that, or being patronizing. So I am thinking of the audience. I'm thinking of those little Marisols and those little Erins, and that's usually who I'm writing for. Now, hopefully it appeals to the kids who weren't little Marisols and little Erins, but those are the ones that I'm thinking of in my head.
Thank you. Have you encountered issues or problems in your writing? Like, do you have something that you struggle with when you write? And how do you deal with these issues?
I think one of my biggest struggles with writing was when I wrote Lilani of the Distant Sea, which is my only fantasy. And I struggled because, similar to the reasons I mentioned earlier, is I'm a very interior writer, and I think a lot about the characters' interiority and how they're feeling and how the world looks to them. And I I can struggle at times with setting. I mean, to make it very simplistic, setting is sometimes a struggle. And in fantasy, setting is obviously extremely important because you're building a new world that the reader doesn't understand, and you have to figure out, how will I immerse the reader in this world, while also in an interesting way, while also giving them space to understand what's happening. And so that was one of the struggles that I went through. And I feel like as a writer, that's probably the biggest, I don't know if I want to call it a hurdle, but when I struggle with writing, that's usually the area that I'm struggling with. Is I feel like I'm very much, characterization is very much my lane, but whenever I have to start explaining the world around, that's whenever I have to like really sit down and use my brain.
I just thought of the map that you drew in that setting. The map that you
Yes.
drew in, maybe, yeah.
Yes, you know what, it
I
is.
loved it.
And that's the good thing about realistic fiction, right? Is that you don't really have to explain what your neighborhood looks like. Because we all know what a neighborhood looks like, probably. So yes, thank you. I had a lot of fun drawing that map. Because I loved maps when I was a kid, and I still love maps and books. So I thought, I'm going to put a map in here.
Well, you have the map of the neighborhood, and
Here's the
see the scary dog somewhere.
Yes.
And so you had the map of the neighborhood, and then the map of Marisol's mind. That was my favorite, because speaking of being seen, it's like, well, Marisol is mean. I have all these thoughts too, right?
Yes, I'm so glad you said that, because that was my goal. Because I feel like I often have thoughts bumping into each other, is what I often say, and that's what I wanted to demonstrate. And that's also an example of, trying to find it here. That's also an example of how the illustrations can serve the narrative, because it's not impossible, of course, but it's a little more difficult to kind of demonstrate what that looks like or feels like in words. Sometimes it's just more effective. So these are all her thoughts bouncing around, and a lot of these thoughts were thoughts that I had when I was her age as well. So that was another inspiration. So she has a very busy mind, as we can see.
Your illustrations actually tell some of the story. That you don't find it in the writing, you find it in the drawing. So it's kind of like a hybrid. It's also like a picture book.
Thank you. I mean, that's the goal, right?
Yeah. So supposing, well, what would you tell beginning writers or struggling writers? What would be your advice?
My biggest piece of advice is that a good writer is always a good reader. So you read a lot of books. Believe it or not, there are writers out there who don't read, and I don't understand, like people who want to be writers who don't read books, and I can't fathom that. So read a lot and write a lot. I mean, it seems very obvious, but those would be my biggest pieces of advice.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you very much, and for your answers. They're very inspiring. And before we officially end the event, let's play a game. Okay, so it's called Fast Talk.
Oh, okay.
So you just answer what's on the top of your mind as quickly as possible in around 2 to 3 sentences.
Okay. Oh boy. Okay.
All right. So first, what is your top 3 books that you always recommend?
Okay, I would say A Wish in the Dark by Christina Soon-Tornvat, Everlasting Nora by Marie Miranda Cruz, Filipino author, and When You Reach Me by Rebecca Stead.
Why? No, I am not asking why for that last book, sorry. But why these three books? I'm curious.
They're full of heart. They have amazing characters at the center of them, and they're also great stories. So they're great stories propelled by incredible characters. So you kind of get the best of everything, and setting. Each of them has a very rich setting. So you get the best of everything literature has to offer.
All right. So good characters, strong setting, and
Great
stories
story.
with heart.
Yes.
All right. What are the top three things that you love about being a Filipino American writer?
I love hearing from Filipino American readers who say that my book was the first book they picked up where they saw themselves. That's number one for sure. Number two is being able to connect with my heritage, my background. And number three is kind of related to that, is being able to, when I was growing up, it was very difficult for me to embrace the things that made me different. I was the only Asian in just about every class, certainly the only Filipino in every classroom and in every setting. And it didn't feel good to me when I was a kid, but now I embrace all those things, and writing reminds me of why that's important. And so I would say those are my favorite things.
Okay. Okay, now this is another game. It's this or that. You can only choose one.
Oh no, okay.
Paperback or hardcover?
Hardcover.
Okay. Why?
I think that I do love paperbacks because they're easier to carry around, but there's something really special about just a hardcover. I don't really even know why. It's just something special about them.
They're sturdier, maybe.
They're sturdier, yeah. They look nicer on the bookshelf, although paperbacks can look very nice as well. So they both have their pros and cons. So really I read both, but you said I can only pick one, so I picked hardcover.
You won. Dog ear or bookmark?
Bookmark. I don't want to throw shade at anyone who dog ears their pages. You do whatever you want with your books, but I have, it's hard for me to dog ear something. I have to use a bookmark. Yeah.
Okay. Do you write on your books? Sorry.
Sometimes I do. Yeah, sometimes I do, which is kind of odd because you would think if I don't dog ear, then why would I write? But for some reason, writing in the book is okay. But creasing the page, gives me anxiety. So I do write sometimes. I'll underline lines that are particularly beautiful, and sometimes I'll even write down words that I'd never heard before.
Okay, sorry. Back to the this or that game. Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Definitely an early bird.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you like the morning.
Yes, I love morning.
Read all day or write all day?
Read all day. I'm a reader first. I'm always a reader first.
Lumpia.
Oh no, I already don't like this. What's the second option?
Lumpia or pancit canton?
Okay. That's the hardest one so far. I'm gonna say lumpia, but really, honestly, could go either way. Okay. But it's easier to snack. You know what I mean? Like just to sit and like snack. So we'll use that, I guess.
Lumpia.
Yeah.
That was my guess because you had a stuffed cat named
Yes.
Lumpia.
Yes, that is true. I mean, who doesn't love lumpia? I mean, come on. But or pancit for that matter. But you can't sit there and eat it. It's a little more low maintenance. So I'm going to go with that. That's my reasoning.
So these are questions from your book. Where would you go if you could go anywhere? And what will you do?
Oh boy, if I could go anywhere, honestly, I would love to time travel because I love history. But the problem is I don't know which era I would travel to because there's so many choices. But if I could go anywhere, I would go back in time to some era, I don't know which, and I would be invisible and I would just observe. That's what I would love to do.
I like that part, being invisible.
Yes, I just want to be invisible.
Is there a particular author you would you would like to meet in the past?
You know, I don't think so. I would be worried because what if I meet them and they're not nice? But you know what? It would be interesting to meet William Shakespeare only because in Western literature, he's so influential and there's so much, not that I'm a huge Shakespeare fan, but I mean, he's extremely influential and we know nothing about him, virtually nothing about him. So it would be interesting to kind of go back and see what he's about. And if he's not nice, that's fine. It wouldn't ruin the experience for me. I don't know.
And you could be invisible.
Yes, I could be invisible and just observe.
Yeah.
Yes. And then I would make a lot of money when I came back in modern times because I'd have all this information about Shakespeare that no one else has.
Yeah. Okay. Question number 2 from your book. If you could be an animal, what would it be and why?
I would definitely be a bird because I would just want to fly around, even though I'm afraid of heights. But if I'm a bird, I probably wouldn't be afraid of heights. I just want to fly around and see what the world looks like from high above, and just see the majesty of the world without all the problems that we have, without seeing that, just seeing the landscape. I think that would be incredible just to see everything, the beauty of the world, the physical beauty of the world. I would love to see.
Okay. And lastly, the fully booked signature question. Do you judge a book by its cover?
I do. I mean, not with people. I try not to do it with people, but with actual books.
It's okay with books.
I will say that book covers make a difference for me. They're not necessarily going to prevent me from reading a book a bad book cover won't necessarily prevent me from reading a book. However, I have picked up and read many books just because the cover was amazing. So apparently I do.
Well, that's all we have. Thank you very much, Erin. It was fun.
Yes, it was delightful. And thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here.
And to everyone who joined us today, thank you very much. And we hope you had fun too. Erin's books are available at Fully Booked branches and at www.fullybookedonline.com. Click the link in the comments section to check out Erin's titles. Thank you very much and keep on reading.
Yes. And follow me on social media, Erin Entrada. I would love to have you.
Okay. you.